Welcome to the Women Who Glorify podcast. I'm your host, Jasmine Grace, and I strive to center every discussion with authenticity rooted on biblical truth for young adult Christian women. My hope is that you will see how you can glorify God in your current season through your career, relationships, and serving in your community. Together, let's put down the lie that someone else's life is better than ours and that our current season isn't good enough. Instead, let's seek and lean on God, trusting His timing is good and acknowledging He knows we need our current season to prepare us for our future seasons. Come be encouraged on how to be a woman who glorifies God as I gather with my friends and they share a glimpse into their lives as women who glorify God. Happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome back to the Women Who Glorify podcast with me, Jasmine Grace. This week, we are talking all about engagement, and so the beautiful engagement season that it is. We'll be talking about it with my friend Hanna. She has a lot to share with you guys, so I'm excited for this episode, and I want you to know, too, that if you're not currently engaged, there is still a lot to be able to learn and even relate to and gain insight on. Being able to see a real perspective about what the engagement season entails can be very helpful. Don't forget, as you're about to listen to today's episode, to be able to get the refinement journal that's going to help you be able to apply today's episode to your current season of life. I recently just launched the first batch of phone digital backgrounds that turned out super cute and really fun, helpful, practical reminders of affirmations, scripture, and quotes from the first 3 episodes. So be sure to go and access it on the Patreon, and the link will be in the show notes below. As we start this episode, make sure right now in this moment to invite the Holy Spirit into this time. Have the Holy Spirit speak to you specifically how this can really bloom and blossom in your life. Everything Hanna is about to share of this sweet transition season. And now, welcoming Hanna onto the Women Who Glorify podcast. Hey, Hanna.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I chose to invite you on as a guest to the podcast because of your heart for the Lord. I just think it's so evident and how I've gotten to know you through our small group women's Bible study and just in our friendship. And I just admire your genuine desire to seek after God's heart and grow closer to Him. And I just really see you glorify Him in that way. And so I was like, I have to have Hanna on.
Thank you, Jasmine. That's so sweet.
For our audience listening in, Hanna is a woman after God's own heart. I am blessed to know Hanna as we met, like I said, at our women's Bible study. Since we've talked through relationships and wedding planning together, we ventured through various seasons as friends, and we've also enjoyed some fun game nights. She is just so humble. She's considerate. She's compassionate. She's gentle and thoughtful, sweet, genuine, and just kind to everyone around her. For her work, she's a nanny, caring for 2 girls, and she's also a student studying for her bachelor's degree in child studies. She's currently engaged to her fiance. His name is Kenneth, and recently she is busy with plenty of wedding planning, schoolwork, but when she can get some time away, she enjoys quality time with her fiance and also her family. And I have to mention that you grew up with 10 siblings. So when I say family, it's a lot of people.
It's like a fun fact. Yeah.
Definitely a fun fact. And I'm an only child, which I haven't actually mentioned in the podcast yet. That's definitely interesting. Our very opposite sides coming into that, but I love it.
It's great. Yeah, it's great.
Great. So let's start, Hanna, by talking about your work right now as a nanny, but then also your studies as a student. So can you just give us a little overview about your current job and then also your studies?
So I've been in school since 2019, doing just part-time school, pecking away at it, slow and steady, and still being able to work full-time. So I've been nannying with this family since 2020. I make it work. My school load isn't crazy busy. I usually will do school on the weekend. I do have to prioritize time, stay up on those time management skills, and I've been in school now for a long time. So I think it's kind of good to have that discipline. I have 1 year left. I'm not in any rush, obviously. And then with nannying, I've been doing this for a long time. So I think after I graduate, I will be looking for something different, just more of a challenge, but just kind of seeing where God leads me at, because right now I feel good with where I'm at. These are my passions, so that's why I'm studying child studies because I honestly love what I learn. I love early childhood. So I've been in this field for a while.
What's like a given work week for you? So what does that look like, your layout between school and between nannying?
It sort of varies, but I would say in general, it's like typically like a regular like 8 to 5-ish day, except for Fridays. And I'll do schoolwork in the evenings some days. But with my job, since the girls nap, right now at least during the school year, and then they go to preschool in the mornings, I can do a little bit at work. So that is nice. And that's why I like nannying right now while I'm in school because it's flexible with setting. Since I only taking one class at a time, it's not a huge workload. It's just I do have to like remember, okay, I have a deadline this week, but I can usually do it, by Friday and usually have the weekend free. I always make sure to have it done on like by Saturday so that like I have Sunday to rest.
Right.
So yeah, it's all online. So I think I've told you this, that I was homeschooled.
Yes, you have.
Yeah, this is like all I've ever known. I did like high school, I did PSEO. It's really on my own time. So I do appreciate that.
In the pace that you're taking and the difference of your nannying and then also the studies, where do you see God show up, like in these details throughout that?
I think it's in like having to have self-control, like the discipline that I was talking about. We all have to, have a certain measure of self-control, especially as like believers with sin and stuff like that. But like just even in where you choose to spend your time. And so this is a goal that I'm working towards. I know that I can't freely spend my time serving myself or doing whatever I want to do if I want to reach this goal. My grades will fail or my work will suffer or whatever. I need to be like wise with my time, and I do see that piece of like discipline. I see God kind of ordaining that because I think he is a God of discipline. Like he not only disciplines us, but like he is a God of order and creates order out of chaos, how he created the world. And so, yeah, I think sometimes I struggle with my flesh to be like, oh no, I just want to do what I want to do. It kind of is that reminder just in the little way, like of me having to organize my day. I think it comes from God in a way, that organization, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the way too that you organize your life, right? And you're using discipline. I mean, I feel like I see it also in the pace that you're choosing for your life. You're still working with kids and that's busy, and we'll talk about it, but you're currently wedding planning and you also are studying, right? But you're doing like one class at a time. Is that like an intentional decision you made to say, hey, like I'm not gonna maybe overload myself, or I'm gonna take things more at like a gracious pace and peaceful? Because I've heard before too, in the Bible, it always talks about that Jesus was busy when he was on earth, but he wasn't in a hurry or like in a rush. What does that like resonate with you at all?
For sure. Yeah, I never even thought of it that way, but that's a really good point. It makes me think of like, I think Ecclesiastes that talks about like there's a time for everything, and just like knowing that I have time for this will unfold it. And yeah, I've definitely seen God been faithful to me throughout this process, even though sometimes I'll look at other people and be like, oh, I feel like I'm behind in some ways. And looking back, I'm like so grateful for how it's gone, for listening to like the wisdom of people to be like, just stay strong and just keep doing what you're doing, I guess. But that's a good point, Jasmine.
Well, I admire that too, because our culture today and the message that is being preached really is hustle culture and like rush and like essentially don't even sleep. Like you just got to go, go, go. And I just think that's very just harmful on our bodies. I just don't think God really designed us to be this machine, if you will. Like we really are meant to just give and serve and produce fruit, right? Like fruits of the spirit into others and those around us. And I see that in you, and just having a heart for God's own heart and really just being genuine and sweet to others around you. And I think that also is coming from a place of how you're choosing to manage your time isn't in a rushed form. From just maybe my own life, I'm like, oh, sometimes I'm in seasons where I'm just like rush, and I have to hustle. It feels we also have to trust God and rest in that.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And there's definitely seasons where I'm like very grateful for what time in life that I'm in, and then others that will get discouraged. So it's not like it's smooth sailing all the way. It's like, why am I doing this again? And just kind of remind myself. But overall, like I'm really grateful for how it has gone and for that steady pace.
Well, and I love it too, because it's not about comparing ourselves to anyone else or someone else's journey. Comparison, thief of joy, of course, but focusing on ourselves and where we feel God's leading us, how we want to go about life and that journey too, and keeping it one-on-one, like us and God, not making it be a competition or a comparison, because then that gets back into like selfishness or pride or whatever it might be. Just really focusing on what are we really producing, what fruits in this season. Which that leads me into my next topic of sweet seasons, because Hanna, you are in a very sweet season right now of engagement. I am sure that there is some busyness in that with wedding planning, and I assume so because that was a season I was in not too long ago myself. But first, to paint the picture for our audience briefly, so you got engaged in May 2023, and your wedding is in October. It's about a 6-month engagement. At this time we're recording this episode, you have just under 1 month until you guys are married and you have your wedding. Let's talk about the enjoyment and just unexpected surprises of being a fiance. And first question I have for you is, how did you know that making the decision to say yes to marrying Kenneth would be God honoring?
Yeah, I like that question. I would say I knew pretty early on that, like they asked, like, how do you know who you want? I knew pretty early on because aside from the fact that like a lot of our values lined up and we just like to spend time together, we had some of the same interests, like our families, got along, stuff like that. I loved his heart, and I got to see that very early on, like the genuineness of his heart and his servant leadership. That was kind of it. Like there were so many little things that was like, oh, that's cool. Like we get along on this and that and this and that. But like at the end of the day, just his genuine heart and his desire to serve others. Like I said, like the servant leadership is the one. That's what I need. We're such a good match in that. Like we have different gifts that we can bring to the table, but that's just something I really appreciated about him. Part of me was just like I had known for a long time at that point, but how would it be God honoring? I guess because I know that God is pleased when two people come together in the covenant of marriage to serve him. And I knew that us together was better than us apart. And so together we can serve God.
Yeah, it's ultimately God's design. And I love how you started by saying it's the values. You guys have the same values and you knew that early on. And I think so many people jump into dating not knowing the values of that person. And so then they're trying to figure it out, but then it gets mixed up in the world and all the feels, right? And it's not like logical, if you will. And so I love that you talked about values first and then falling in love with his heart and then loving that. And then servant leadership, you even said like it's what I needed or like what I need, talking about like complementarianism, which is two people, a man and a woman coming together, complementing each other in their strengths and their weaknesses. And I saw that as well when I was dating Ryan. It was just like we constantly were recognizing, okay, wait, this is my strength and his weakness, and we can bring that together. And then this is his strength and that's my weakness. And we can complement each other in that. And that's the same thing. It sounds like you're recognized as well of like, hey, like we're a good match because we complement one another. And now we can be that team and we can be that unity and ultimately be God's design. Because I just want to encourage women who are listening, thinking, I don't know how to know. It's like, you can know early on. I mean, I also would agree. I felt like I knew right away, which is true. And I'll have to share my story at some point on the podcast maybe. But the thing is really going after those core values at the start. And so I love how you started with that. And then just knowing this is God's design and following his plan, knowing that that's best. Really sweet. How would you compare your engagement season to the dating season? What has been highs, lows, differences? How would you compare it?
For me, dating, and he would attest to this too. I mean, towards the end, it was better, but it was a little bit of a confusing time for me, a little bit stressful, a little bit weird, maybe just because how our story went and like there are parts of it that were more confusing. And maybe that was partly the enemy just trying to like deceive us and not bring us together. I don't know. But
for sure.
It was also, I think, some work that the Lord had to do in my heart, just kind of uprooting some selfishness because I was kind of making everything about me.
Yeah.
And so I think once that was kind of dealt with, it got easier. And also just not taking on this burden of trying to control our relationship, I guess. I had some issues with like the timing. And I was like, oh, I mean, we know, like, why don't we just get engaged, get married now, like early on. And he wanted to wait and finish school or at least be like done with that 1 year. And looking back, like, I'm really glad that we did wait, just because like even if nothing else, like it just taught me patience and there was nothing. I mean, I think it was good for both of us. And now like we're getting married in a month, so it's it's great. There was like a lot of lessons that I feel like I learned throughout that dating season, but then contrast that with being engaged. I've loved it. I mean, it hasn't been too stressful, and we have been able to do like the wedding planning together, which has been fun. But like really trying to remind myself why we're doing this. It's not just about the wedding day. This is like
Yeah.
about our marriage. So I've loved it. I think we've
Mhm.
gone through some, yeah, I guess hills and valleys a little bit, but ultimately like just being in counseling and then just like listening to other godly wise older people, just having them pour into us. I think it's been really good for both of us. We've also both been in Bible studies or like just reading good marriage books and things like that. And yeah, just growing closer together as a couple. The only big difference once we got engaged, it was like, okay, we're planning for our wedding, but we're more like intentionally planning for our marriage by like
Yeah.
being in counseling and reading the word and then just planning like what is our life going to look like, what are our days going to look like. So having to come together and just do ordinary things like make our budget and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, this is getting real. So it's
Yep.
for me it's really exciting because I've wanted to be married for a while, and once I knew he was the one, I'm like, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, and it's exciting.
I love the excitement. The intentional part that you talked about, intentionally planning for marriage, the marriage planning, along with, yeah, there's a wedding to plan, and that's like the big attention seeker, but also planning for the marriage. And I think that's something when I was in a season of singleness, I was like not really thinking like, oh, when someone's engaged is what they do. Like it's more about the wedding, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, yeah, that's definitely a huge message. And so it became busy for me of like, okay, I am wedding planning. I'm also planning for marriage. And like you mentioned, budgets and like all the things, very busy season. And dating just seemed more fun and like lighthearted. And sure, there's ups and downs, whatever, but it was way more lighthearted. And then engagement got so much more serious and intentional. And like, okay, there's a goal. We're doing this. This is the real deal. What have been some highlights in the season of engagement that you didn't have perhaps in singleness or in dating? Maybe not even in marriage, but what has been like a highlight of engagement?
I think just honestly telling our families and having them be a part of it. We're trying to involve like all of my family and as much of his family as we can. And I still live at home, so my mom has been helping me a ton with like the planning process. And now just like when it kind of comes over, it just feels like getting closer. The other day he took my brothers out for a day while I was having a bridal shower, and and it was like, oh, it's gonna be like their older brother. It's so exciting because the older brothers are actually, most of them are out of state right now or just don't live at home. So it's just super cool to see he's already becoming like a part of our family, and to kind of like see that future.
Yeah.
That's just like super fun for me. It was super awesome going to Guatemala like right after we got engaged, because that was such a exciting time. And then kind of announcing it to everyone that we were engaged, his family down there, and getting to meet them. That was my biggest play. It's just meeting his family, traveling together, and sharing in that like really special first month where there was no planning going on. It was just exciting and like telling people and dreaming about what we're gonna do and whatever. That was probably my favorite so far. So.
That's so sweet. Yeah, it's like spreading your own good news, right? Yeah, getting people to cheer you on in that. How have you guys been growing closer to Christ in this season of engagement specifically? I know you mentioned you guys are growing closer to each other, but also within that, growing closer in relationship with Christ.
We were in a Bible study over the summer, and then in our counseling with one of the pastors at our church, we're going through a marriage book. Questions that he's having us go through in counseling have helped to facilitate like deeper conversations. I think it is important for us to have still our alone times. Obviously, we are separate a lot still, which we don't live together. But so I've just been trying to be really intentional myself with having that time. Like for me, it's in the morning, having my quiet time. And just lately, I've been learning to just pray more for him, for our marriage, for our future, when we're married, doing that together and being able to like have our quiet times together. And we still might do certain things separately, but praying together more. I think just thinking of marriage, trying to like prepare myself like mentally. I just don't know if, I mean, maybe you can attest to this, but like, I don't know how much you can actually prepare for to an extent, stay in godly counsel. I think that's been the biggest thing.
Yeah, ultimately what you mentioned, honoring God. So continuing to do what he tells us to do of pursuing him and glorifying him as first and foremost in our hearts. But then also I love that you did mention you guys don't live together. And Ryan and I, yeah, same thing. We didn't live together either. And to my surprise, everywhere we would go for wedding planning, people would be like, oh, where should we send it to you guys' house? And we'd be like, huh? Like that's not our world is so far from that idea. So I think, yeah, honoring God in that is ultimately exactly a woman who glorifies God, right? Like we follow his plan in that. And that's going to lead to a biblical marriage. And ultimately, that is marriage of what God designed. And so I love that. And then also, you talked about so many things, growing closer to Christ, and the counseling part of it as well is very important, I would say, for sure. That's huge. And I still think about that now, only like 3 months into marriage. Think about that a lot, the counseling component and pre-counseling and all that for marriage. And that's been really beneficial. And it takes you the long run for sure. Can't fully prepare or plan something like a season you haven't been in yet, but that's what I love. And that's a huge purpose of this podcast, is about our current season has such purpose. And it's so valuable, and God's in it now, today, not just in the future or in the past or where we're headed. He's here now, and there's purpose in where we are, because that is going to prepare us for the future. And we can't plan ahead, but God's taking care of us now, helping us learn these lessons. You mentioned earlier, there's so many lessons in dating that you were learning, and now in engagement, and that just leads to marriage and preparing for that. I think that really is how you prepare for it. We don't know what's coming in our next seasons, whatever that might be for anybody. It is ultimately, that's what the purpose of our current season is, to prepare for the future ones and just have the joy in that. Any other advice you'd give about engagement season that you just want to encourage any other young adult woman out there and might be dealing with something in engagement? Either they're considering getting engaged or they're in it and they're just busy. What would your advice be?
I would say to prioritize friendships and like community. Like we have our small group that we're in together. Any other community like that. Yeah, I've been trying to stay, because I know it can be so busy, and you can be so caught up in each other and like wedding planning and your future together. That's super important. But like, just think of the friendships that you want to carry through till after. Just trying to be purposeful with those. I mean, like my relationships with my siblings, not just brushing them aside, but just trying to involve them. And also just like with my sisters as my friends, trying to just actually work on those relationships and my other friendships as well. Still prioritize community outside of just your relationship. Because after you're married, you're going to still want to be in community with people. Of course, as a couple too, you're going to want godly women to be able to talk about stuff with. So kind of been a nice change of scenery, because I'm just like wedding planning or school or work or whatever. And just to be able to just kind of relax and just talk about someone else's life or just pray together kind of takes you out of my little bubble of like my wedding. All this is all about me. Helps you kind of turn outward a little bit more.
It honestly, that you just described how I was trying to describe you earlier about being humble and considerate of others, compassionate. You just said, take the focus off yourself and others and how you can pour into them. So I think that's really sweet. And it's a hard one to do, especially in the season of engagement.
I'm not saying that I'm like good at it. I'm just saying like it's something I've seen in myself that I'll catch myself sometimes. I'm like, wow, I'm just thinking of only myself right now. So
yes, we all do. And to mention too, you talked about selfishness earlier, but I've on the podcast and my prior episodes, I've talked with women in different seasons of relationships. They've all so far mentioned selfishness, which I find very interesting, right? Singleness, dating, engagement, and marriage, it's in all of them. That's just like the constant thing. But as you mentioned, and I mentioned before, we met through our church and specifically our women's Bible study. Tell us how you decided to join a women's Bible study. And then also our young adult Christian community gathering that's weekly. What made you decide, I'm going to join this community and I'm going to join a women's Bible study?
So I joined the women's Bible study, I want to say like 6 months into going to Grace. I think 6 months after then I started going to the young adult group. The reason I joined the women's is just because I thought, this would be a way to meet the women at this church, but it's so large. Like, how else would I meet people except for these small groups? And it was really helpful for that. I got plugged into like an older women's group and I loved it because like they were super wide. I felt like I didn't really talk much, but they had a lot of good things to share and kind of got me plugged in right away. So that was kind of my reasoning in the beginning. And then with the young adult, I met, obviously at this point, I've been in women's Bible studies, so I'd met a lot of older people. And then I was serving in the nursery, so with like little kids, but I didn't have a lot of peer interaction or like young adult interaction. And so my brother had visited a few times and he was like, we could go sometime. And I had thrown it around a few times, but I wasn't sure about it. So then I was like, I think it's about time. Like I've been going to that church for a year. Kind of was curious to like get involved. And he had mentioned they break up into these separate boy and girl small groups. So, once you find a small group, then you could just kind of have this life group. That kind of appealed to me. I didn't know quite what it was going to be like, but I like the idea that it could be this,
Yeah, small group.
Pretty soon after that, I got plugged into Katie's group. I'm supposed to say her name.
No, you're good. You're good. She is on the podcast, so
okay.
they all know Katie.
Okay, good. Pretty much just for community and meeting other young people. And it's been awesome because I had never had anything like that previous.
Yeah.
It's been so fun, and especially going to a church that we go to, it's so large. There's so many different types of backgrounds, people that were homeschooled like us, or people that were public school, or have parents who are believers or not, or whatever. I feel like I've learned and grown so much being around people that are in my same age or my same stage of life, but we have these different unique things to bring to the table. That's been something that I've really enjoyed.
Community is super important in any relationship season, for that matter. Really being able to have close friends and family that can pour into you to really support you and cheer you on as you navigate each relationship season. I think it's natural as well, and I've heard this before I was even married, and then also I've witnessed it too in marriage, but it's more so that as you do venture into different seasons of life, there are friendships that can phase out or fade out as those changes occur, right? For various reasons, really. And I know it's a natural part of the process. That can be hard. It can be challenging. It can also be expected in a way, unfortunately. What's really important, though, is choosing who are my friends that have the same values that I do, and we can cheer one another on no matter what season we're in. And so it's definitely possible as well to then carry those friendships from one season to the next. And it's just going to differ and change for each person, but yep, we'll have those great community friendships that can really last. So if it's in a Bible study, a small group, women's group, that's great. If it's in community with other young adults, other believers, or also just close friendships, right, that they can come with us into each season. That's a beautiful thing as well. And I just personally love that you had your family come alongside, your own sisters being able to help you in the wedding planning, in the details, making sure that they're not left out in that. And that's really fun and exciting.
Thank you so much for everything you shared and for being on. This has been fun.
Thank you for joining us today by listening to the Women Who Glorify podcast, where I strive to center every discussion with authenticity rooted on biblical truth for young adult Christian women. Join us next week by following Women Who Glorify on wherever you listen to podcasts. I hope you feel encouraged and equipped on how you're to be a woman who glorifies God in your current season of life. If you have a minute, please leave a review by sharing how you've been encouraged through this podcast so it can be found by more women who need biblical truth and be lifted up in their current season. Share this episode with your friends, family, and on social media by tagging @the Jasmine Grace and @Women Who Glorify. For deeper growth, community, and exclusive podcast content, join Women Who Glorify on Patreon. Click the link in the show notes. I'm Jasmine Grace, and I'm so grateful to have you join in to Women Who Glorify.